Good evening, cadets. I am Ayo Shaw and I'll be your instructor for today's lesson. In our previous lesson, we briefly touched upon conventional signs and symbols. Now, we're going to explore that further as well as move on to other stuff, most notably 4-figure and 6-figure grid reference. But to get there, we need to take steps. So, what are conventional signs and symbols? These are signs and symbols that represent permanent features on the ground. Let me show you my map. Now, as we can see here, in the marginal information, and if you remember, you recall that marginal information is any additional information found within the margin of the map. We can see representations of conventional signs and symbols. I know from a previous video, I would have made it appear that these in themselves are conventional signs and symbols, but in truth, they are representations of conventional signs and symbols found on the map. So these are marginal information, and this section specifically is called the legend of the map. But remember, let's not get confused here. Marginal information, any additional information found within the margin of the map. These here represent conventional signs and symbols found on the map. Now, let's just look for example. Since you're in a school and you're going to school, let's look for a school. We see here a representation of the conventional sign and symbol for a school, and we're going to try and find that conventional sign and symbol on the map. And we can see one right here. Gordon's Crossing School. Not only can we see a school, we can see a postal agency right here. You can bring it up further. Postal agency represented PA. Now, if you look at the map closely, and what stands out or really sticks out is that the map is in colored. And if you look at the map, you realize that these colors differ, and some might even be familiar. You might even guess some. For example, you might think that okay, green might represent landforms and blue water bodies, and in that you would be correct. So let's go and check the marginal information on the map, and we can see here that water body is represented by the color blue. We can see here that forest is represented by the color dark green. So the different colors on the map are given within the marginal information to represent the different areas on the map. Another important information to note about the map is the scale. Now, this is a scale and this is a scale. This is known as a bar scale. This is very important for when we're going to be doing the 6-figure grid reference. This is also important in knowing what it means and what it represents. So what this is saying, 1 to 25,000, what it means is that for every 1 unit on the map is 25,000 units on the ground. Let me repeat, for every 1 unit on the map represents 25,000 units on the ground. Now it's very specific in not giving a metric unit such as kilometers, meters, miles, because that is determined by this. The metric unit is determined by this, the bar scale. So this tells you how it's on actual ground versus the map, and this gives you the metric units. So if you're ever asked a question, what does this scale on the map mean, and it's in any value different from this, we will always start with 1, and whatever this value ends up, this second value, 25,000, 30,000, 50,000, whatever it ends up here, you know it means 50,000 units. This means 1 unit on the ground, 1 unit on the map represents 25,000 units on the ground. Now, as we move on to four-figure grid reference, there are things you need to know. Just simply know. There's no going around it, you just need to know it. And these are eastings and northing lines. Very pertinent to know what are eastings, very pertinent to know what are northings to be able to do a four-figure grid reference. Now, figures, if now what is a grid? The grid lines here, as you can see, the grid lines, we can see lines here, grid lines. Four figures means, as exactly you might guessed, four figures, precisely four. Let's just show our presentation. 1, 2, 3, 4. So for a four-figure grid reference, you're looking for four figures. To determine these four figures, you need to know what are eastings and what are northings initially. And so what are eastings? This is a formal definition. Easting lines are vertical lines that run from north to south and increase in numeric value going east. So these lines here at the bottom are easting lines. If you look at them, they increase in numeric value going east, and they run from north to south. North to south, increasing numeric value going east. Northing lines are horizontal lines that run from west to east and increase in numeric value going north. So these are northings. As you can see, the increase in numeric value going north. Increase in numeric value going north. So these are northing lines. And as you can see, when we combine eastings and northings, we get a grid, a square, a grid, a square. Hence, grid reference. Reference, location, grid, square. Four figure, you're looking for four figures. Now, how to get these four figures would involve your easting lines and your northing lines. So, when finding a location or grid referencing a location, grid referencing a conventional sign and symbol on the map, you would use eastings and northing lines for a four-figure grid reference, looking for four figures. So let me just do an example. Let's go back to the school that we discovered earlier in Gordon's Crossing. We need four figures. These four figures are going to be a combination of our eastings and northing lines. However, which one do we read first to determine this four-figure grid reference? The answer to that is that eastings are read before northings. Eastings are read before northings. So this becomes a very pretty simple answer. The school we're reading eastings before northings. Easting lines are vertical lines that run from north to south and increase in numeric value going east. So I'm looking so Gordon's Crossing, I'm looking for the eastern line that correlates to the school that I'm looking for. I'm going down, I'm going down, I'm going down. Follow the map utilizing the advantages of a concertina and 52. So we see that the first two values for the four-figure grid reference is 52, referencing the eastern lines. So 5, 2. But we're not finished. It's called a four-figure grid reference. There's only two figures. We've read our eastings, now we need to read our northings. Going back to the school, we've located the eastings. Now we need to locate the northings. Northings, horizontal line that runs from west to east and increasing numeric value going north. And so we can find the associated northing lines. We go across and 98. So 9, 8. Hence, the grid reference for the school in Gordon's Crossing is 52, 98. And that is four-figure grid reference. Very easy, right? A trick. Should you forget which one to be read first, you know what are eastings, you know what are northings. You have to know this, but you've forgotten which one do you read first. Do you read eastings before northings, or do you read northings then eastings? A trick to easily remember which one is done first is to think of the letter L. Recall that the letter L has two lines, a vertical line and a horizontal line. Vertical line and a horizontal line. Eastings, northings. Eastings, northings. So that's a very simple way, a trick to remember which of the lines, grid lines, is read should you forget. But fundamentally, you have to know what are eastings and northings. Now, this is for a four-figure grid reference. You have now another type of grid reference called a six-figure grid reference. Going from four-figure to six-figure grid reference requires an additional step. That's it. Now, recall the four-figure grid reference because we're going to be using the same point, which is easier. So we're still looking at the school along the non-functional railway at Gordon's Crossing. And for this school, we determined the four-figure grid reference to be 52, 98. Now, as you can see here, I have six-figure and I have two blank spaces. Just like the four-figure, six-figure requires six figures. So we've already determined the four-figure grid reference. Now we need two additional figures to determine the six-figure. How we're going to do that? What is going to aid in our finding these final two figures will be this scale here, known as the bar scale. we're going to need to remove this scale, lift it off the map, and somehow put it over here in this grid reference that we've already determined as a 4-figure grid reference. We need to put this scale over there because it's necessary to determine our 6-figure grid reference. How we're going to do that is also pretty easy. First step, flat straight edge. We have a flat straight edge. We're going to line up such straight edge with the bar scale, and we're going to make graduations between the 0 mark and the highest point, the highest gradient, well, the highest graduation on the scale. So for this scale, that's 1,000 meters. I am going to do this using a pen for representational purposes, so it's easier to see. But of course, for any markings on the map which should not be on the map in the first place, should be done as lightly as possible in pencil. Also note that these lines that I'm making between the 0 and 1,000 meters on the bar scale should be as straight as possible, in line with the graduation as close as possible for accuracy, which is very important. And so I've made the graduations here, and as you can see, they're in line. So I made a graduation for the 0, 200, 400, 600, 800, and 1,000 meters. Next, we're going to make secondary graduations. So these I've made here are primary graduations. We're going to make a set of secondary graduations. How we're going to do that is we're going to go to the microscale, as I call it, and we're going to find the halfway point between the primary graduations, and we're going to make those markings as well. So let me do that. And here it is, the halfway point between the primary graduations. Now, if you should realize the primary graduations are longer than the secondary graduations. That is for easy representation. After we've done that, we're going to number these graduations from 0 to 10. However, we cannot put 10 on our scale, so the number 10 will be represented by 0. In other words, 0 for this first graduation, 0 for this last graduation. However, it is represented by the 0. However, this means 10, and everything graduation in between numbering 0 through to 9. And here is how it looks: 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and this final 0 representational of the number 10. And we've now made our bar scale. We've taken it from here, and we've now made it very much movable and maneuverable. Next, we're going to locate our 4-figure grid reference, which we already have, 5298. So 5298. We need the 2 additional figures, and these 2 additional figures will involve our easting lines and northings. However, which one is read first and how? Recall a trick for the 4-figure grid reference is the letter L. The letter L, should you forget to read eastings or northings, for the 4-figure grid reference, all you have to remember is the letter L, provided that you know fundamentally what are Eastings and Northings. And so the letter L, Eastings, Northings. That's for 4-figure grid reference. For 6-figure grid reference, it would be the reverse. So the reverse of the letter L. In other words, Northings would be red, then Eastings. Northings, then Eastings. How is that done? We're going to take our makeshift scale that we made from our bar scale. Remember, we're going to the reverse of the L, hence Northings, and we know what Northings are. We're going to align it with the northing line. It is aligned, and we're going to read the closest possible value to the school. What I like to do is that once I've aligned it with the northing line, I move it, my scale, up to the conventional sign and symbol of which the grid reference I'm trying to determine, so I can get a more accurate reading. Based on what I can see here, the school at Gordon's Crossing is between 7 and 8. It is neither at 7 and it is neither at 8. Now, once this happens, you're going to use the number for which the conventional sign of symbol is closest to. So looking at this, the school at Gordon's Crossing is closer to 7 than it is 8. It's not at 8 yet. So it's 7. So 7 will be our additional figure that we will be adding to the 6-figure grid reference. So we are there 4 figures. We determined our 5th figure and we'll put in it here. We determined that figure to be 7. This is 5 figures, but we're trying to find 6 figures because it's a 6-figure grid reference. We've already read the northings. Now we're going to read the eastings, the reverse of the L. Same thing that we did when reading the northings. Align it with the grid. I like to move it up as close as possible to the conventional sign and symbol I'm trying to determine the grid reference of. And as I can see from my scale, that it is at the number 3. And so this is my figure, an additional figure, 3. And that's it. 6-figure grid reference. So the school at Gordon's Crossing, the 6-figure grid reference for the school at Gordon's Crossing is 527983. We're not finished, however. The only thing you need to add after this is put in GR. GR means grid reference. So when you're saying giving an answer for grid reference, when you're giving a grid reference, you GR, representation of grid reference, and then the figures. So 4-figure grid reference, the 4 figures, 6-figure grid reference, 6 figures. So for the 5-figure grid reference, the 4-figure grid reference, fig, GR, and then the 4 figures, which were 5, 2, 9, 8. And that's 6-figure grid reference and 4-figure grid reference.